so from that perspective, you're bringing on a lot of risk with AI, whether that's used in third party or other areas of your business. That could be commercial risk, reputational risk, and of course the big one, Boris, would be, as you mentioned, compliance and regulatory risks that could be involved with that. But it's really, I think the benefits are it's telling you how to best protect yourself, your clients, your patients, in some cases your country, from the risks of third-party risk management. I mean, one of the obvious things that we think that they should do is create an AI policy.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Brad Hibbert. Brad is a Chief Operating Officer and Chief Strategy Officer at Prevalent.net, which is a leading third-party risk management company. Brad, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's my pleasure too. So, Brad, I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of the impact of AI regulations on third-party risk management. But before that, could you please tell us a short story about yourself, your career path, and what brought you where you are right now? Maybe some about something about what you are guys at Prevalent.net are up to these days.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Brad Hibbert. So as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Strategy Officer at Prevalent. I came up through more of the technical track. I started off coming out of university through development, and then went into getting my MBA and kind of getting more into the business side of things. I spent the first part of my career more on inside risks. So things around vulnerability scanning, privileged access management, those sorts of helping organizations protect themselves on the inside of the perimeter, if you will. And then about 2019, we started seeing that organizations were struggling with managing the risks associated with their third parties. Once they kind of looked outside of the traditional corporate perimeter, there's a lot of risk out there, and organizations were struggling to really contain that and to mitigate those risks. So in about 5 years ago, I came over to this company, Prevalent, at Prevalent.net, and we build out some comprehensive third-party risk management programs for clients, and just make sure that they can efficiently grow those programs and scale those programs with the level of quality that they're looking for. So that's kind of my background. What we've been up to is just working with customers to, I think, provide more comprehensive third-party risk management programs. I think, in the past, organizations typically looked at one dimension of risk, like cyber risk, for example, with their third parties. And then, then of course, privacy risk came into play. I think we went through COVID and a lot more around business resilience. Then we went through the S3, emissions controls, types of risks were added to the program, and then ESG was added to the program. And now we have AI added to the program. So certainly it's been a lot of fun, kind of helping customers kind of work through some of these complexities in the dynamic environment that they're trying to work through. So a little bit of background on me and Prevalent, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So I think the AI is certainly a major topic these times, and we have been hearing from about AI from other guys with respect to AI on security, AI on ethics, and then today we will have a discussion about what AI is specifically doing for third-party risk. So can you, Brad, can you outline the current landscape of AI regulations as they pertain to third-party risk management, and what are the key regulation or frameworks that companies need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think, if you think about it from two perspectives, I guess one is how are people thinking about AI with respect to their third-party risk management program itself? And as I mentioned, I think it's another risk that people need to consider. When you embrace AI, you need to understand: are you buying, are you developing, are you using AI in a responsible way that won't cause harm to individuals or groups of individuals? And from that, and again, so from that perspective, you're bringing on a lot of risk with AI, whether that's used in third party or other areas of your business. That could be commercial risk, reputational risk, and of course the big one, Boris, would be, as you mentioned, compliance and regulatory risks that could be involved with that. And so what we see organizations doing from a third-party risk management perspective is really a few different things. One is, I think they have to consider the broader third-party estate when they're considering AI. I mean, if you think about AI, it's more powerful and more flexible than a lot of the other IT systems that we're familiar with. And I think it can handle more use cases. And also its technology and just the features of the technology make them more difficult to understand. And so from that perspective, people need to cast a wider net with the third-party programs. So they want to get more third parties within the scope of the third party program to make sure that they're managing these risks. I think the other way that it impacts a third party risk management program, other than getting more coverage on more third parties that are potentially using AI in some way, is consider how you're profiling and tiering your third parties, right? To be aware of the risks and the potential obligations that you have to adhere to some of these compliance regulations, for example. I mean, if you look at a lot of the compliance mandates that are out there, and I'm here in the U.S. I'm in Canada. You know, Scott's in the U.S. You're outside of that area territory, but there's different laws and perspectives on AI, starting from sort of local and state and federal and national and then international levels. But I think all of these different regulations take a risk-based approach to helping customers minimize the risks associated with third-party risk management. And what I mean by that is the more harm that it could cause to individuals or groups of individuals, for example, the more diligence and the more rigor that you're going to have to put in place to ensure that you're doing that in a safe and ethical and appropriate way. And so when you're thinking about profiling and tiering your third parties, you got to take a look at those relationships and understand, how are they using the third party risk management to elevate the product or service, right? And I think regardless of the type of regulation or the territory, I think there's some common threads that you're going to see start to come into play. I think one is you're going to need to make sure that you uphold sort of the security aspects of the technology that you're adopting and using, of course, cybersecurity controls and so on. But I think the bigger one is you're also going to have to make sure that you have appropriate controls in place from a data security perspective, because when you think about many of these AI systems, the ones that process personal information, so they take a large volume of personal information that could be about customers or patients, for example, right? It could be employees and staff members, and they start to process that information and come with outputs. That information is very sensitive, and that could be under, you could be obligated from a compliance perspective to make sure that you're putting some additional sort of policy and process in place around that. So I think when you're thinking about tiering and profiling your third parties from a risk management perspective, you have to understand that when it starts to involve things like privacy, data around users, that you may be obligated to have another level of data privacy and control. So how's that data being used? How's it being protected? And those sorts of things. So I think those are two things that people need to consider. So broader footprint of third parties that you consider, and you have to consider about the type of data and the potential impact that it could have. And particularly those that impact users and user data are probably going to require higher levels of oversight and guidance. And then lastly, I think, which is a bit new, is really ensuring that you have I call it kind of a bucket of ethical use or appropriate use. So making sure that it's free from bias, you have the oversight in place to make sure that there's no discrimination in the outputs, that it's not harming people in a certain way, that they're explainable and they're transparent, and those sorts of things. So that's a little bit newer. But as you start to profile and tier your third parties, you're going to want to take these things into consideration. And then the third way I think that it will impact your third-party risk management process is going to be is that you kind of once you get those third parties in the purview of the risk management program, once you profile and tier them, you're going to want to make sure that you apply the right level of oversight and assessment to those, right? So you're going to want to again understand the types of risks, make sure that when you're asking questionnaires, you're doing that with an AI lens, to make sure that you're addressing the concerns that are brought to the table through those third parties. So I think at a high level, those would be the three areas that I think would have the biggest impact on the third party program. And then of course we leverage AI in our solutions as well to help drive efficiency and scale in automating many of those processes as well. So hopefully that answers the question, at least at a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. So impact is very, you defined it very clear. So what do you see as common challenges or complexities that organizations face when trying to align their AI practices with the regulatory requirements in the realm of third-party risk management?
Yeah, I think, when I think about, I guess when I look at third-party risk management, I think about AI. I think about the negatives and positives, right? I think from a negatives perspective, look, it's more complexity that needs to be managed, right? Because you're going to have more laws that need to be managed. I think you're going to have more complexity in the reporting requirements to regulators at those various levels, so local, state, federal, international levels. I think that's going to create more overhead for teams to kind of go through and demonstrate that. more diligence, so more questions and more proof points that you're going to need from your provider. So those are kind of the negatives. I think the positives are really it's telling you the things that maybe you should, in the aspects of risk that you should be managing already. Again, some of those you should be doing from a data privacy perspective, for example, right? Many of those things should be covered by existing legislation, like GDPR, for example. It might not explicitly be calling out some of the things around AI, but they will start to augment some of those regulations to call out those things. But it's really, I think the benefits are it's telling you how to best protect yourself, your clients, your patients, in some cases, your country, from the risks of third-party risk management. The challenge is really, creating a balance, I think, of what's the right level of diligence that you're going to need based on the harm that it can create, and still enabling your company to harness the power of AI to improve the level of service or product that you're providing to your clients.
Mm-hmm. Could you share some examples, maybe without names of case studies where companies have either excelled or struggled in meeting this a kind of AI regulatory expectation with third-party risk strategies?
Yeah, I think I'll just give you a few examples, I guess, if that makes sense. So I think that if you have an organization today, and again, I'll go back to if you're implementing things that take in consideration personal information. So for example, just take, for example, an HR department. If you have an HR department that is making decisions on a day-to-day basis, they're getting in, thousands of resumes, and they're going through those resumes and selecting candidates, and they're hiring people, and they're promoting people, they're handing out bonuses, and they're doing that through a decision process of your staff who have processes to go through these things, right? If you now embrace an HR system that's going to take a lot of that work off the plates of your team and put that into a technology where it's going to automatically go through using, document scanning to pull in, resumes and so on, and start to filter through those and tell you and give you advice on things you should do. Well, just like, your team is responsible for being unbiased and not discriminated against people or groups of individuals when they're making the decisions. Just because I'm using a technology now to make those decisions doesn't mean I'm washing my hands of those obligations. I have to make sure that technology still applies those same levels of control and guidance and oversight to make sure that I'm not performing those things that would impact or harm those subsets or those individuals. So that would be one example where you need to kind of, again, when you look at your third parties, you want to profile and tier them to understand the potential risk and make sure that you put the appropriate steps in place, that technology is not making decisions that could negatively impact your customer. I could go on. Another area would be in the financial market, for example, if people are making decisions on who should get loans or maybe get approved for mortgages. Again, if I'm pushing those decisions now to kind of, at least some of the decision making is done by a machine. Again, I'm not washing my hands of the obligations that they have to make sure that it's doing that in an ethical way and not putting anybody at harm. So does that make sense? And a couple of examples, I think, that to kind of push that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brad, I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What are the major misconception in the field of AI, in the risk management field, that you are strongly disagree with?
It's a good one. I think one of the concerns that a lot of individuals have is they just think that there's no regulation, particularly, take a look at somewhere like the US where there's no, federal legislation in place around AI. It's coming, but it's not there yet. And so a lot of people will think that there's nothing in place to protect people from AI today. Now, there are some movements at the local and state, and even at the federal agency level, where they're augmenting some of those regulations to handle specific use cases of AI within their jurisdiction. But a lot of people think that there's just nothing out there from a protections perspective. But again, existing laws do protect people in a lot of different ways. I mentioned a couple of examples around, financial example and an HR example. Those laws still apply. If your HR system is violating, a law in some way by, introducing bias or discriminatory decision making, then you're still obligated under law to take care of those things. So I think there is some patchwork out there, but I do think there are some protections in place. But I think it's unclear for people from an obligations perspective what they need to do, and they need some better clarity around that. I think that's one of the misconceptions. I think the other misconception is to think that some of the technology providers, I mean, they do quite a bit to protect their systems, but I think that I think there's a lack of trust in some cases with some of these, call them the large technology providers of the AI. And this is where I do think that, again, I think that they have some processes in place around security and making sure that the products are ethical and don't have bias in them. But I think having them being certified or having a regulation that gives people the confidence that they're doing the right things will allow people to deploy them with less, I think more quickly and with a level of trust that they lack today. So I think there's some things done, but I certainly think regulation is going to help with the appropriate adoption of AI.
Mhm. So let's drill a little bit deeper. For example, if we take a life of a risk or compliance manager in the enterprise, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize right now that they're not doing, what would that be?
It's funny. We just did a survey for our clients around third-party risk management, and we found that only 5% of our people within our within our outreach, if you will, are leveraging AI within their third-party risk programs today. However, about 60% are considering implementing AI. And so I would say, and that's just with third-party risk management. I think that would be similar across all different aspects of the business. You have the business is looking at ways to be competitive, to improve the service levels, and so they're chomping at the bit to kind of embrace AI. And so I think that as a risk manager, what you want to do is try to get ahead of that. I mean, we had this in the past where the business kind of got out ahead of things. Maybe with virtual machines. If you remember, people started deploying virtual machines everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it from a SaaS perspective, businesses started buying up these SaaS applications and they started popping up everywhere, right? And we think the same thing could happen with AI. The business is going to move forward and start to embrace AI. And so there's a couple of things I think that risk managers should be doing, if they haven't done it already. I mean, one of the obvious things that we think that they should do is create an AI policy. So really describe, kind of what is appropriate use and not appropriate use within the organization. And I think that AI policy has to do a few things. I think one, it has to help educate the different business leaders and departments and so on the risks associated with AI, including things like mistakes and bias and hallucination and those sorts of things, and talks about some of these ethical issues from an education perspective, right? And talk about some of the regulatory risks. So people are aware of it. It should be in that AI policy. I think that the AI policy should also outline the roles and responsibilities of the different constituents within the business. So everything from the executives to the business leaders to the developers that might be developing some tools around AI for you, down to information security and down to the users as well. Everybody has obligations that they need to adhere to. You've probably heard examples where developers were sending source code up to ChatGPT, or people were sending, proprietary information to help them write RFPs outside these things shouldn't be happening, right? But you have to provide guidance to people on things that they shouldn't be doing. And so I think that would certainly be a start. An AI policy that has some teeth in it too, to talk about some consequences if they don't follow the guidelines in the AI policy would be helpful. So I think that's one of the first things that they should do. In parallel to kind of creating that AI policy, I think people should really aggressively start to invest in leadership and employee training awareness around AI and the risks of AI. That training should include, if possible, a review of the AI policy itself, so people can understand what their obligations are and so forth. I think that those are first couple things. Stay agile, continue to update yourself on the changes in the regulatory landscape and the different obligations that you have. So those are just a couple of the high level things that I would recommend. And of course, including AI and within the third party risk management program would probably be the last thing. So hopefully those things make sense. But we are surprised when we do outreach at the number of companies that are still haven't formalized or released their AI policy to this point. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, great. AI policy idea is a great starter, right? So looking towards the future, what trends or developments do you anticipate in terms of AI regulation and the impact on third-party risk management? How should companies prepare to adapt to these changes effectively?
Yeah, I think if you think about it, I think the EU with the EU Act is probably on the forefront, right? They've kind of come up with some regulation that kind of ties again, go back to the potential harm on individuals, and they provide some prescriptive guidance around that. In the U.S., I think that there's a couple of things in play. I think President Biden came up with his executive order, I think in last October, that's providing guidance to government agencies on things that they should be doing to prepare for and to assess the risk around AI, and that including some directives for over 50 agencies, right, with like 100 different actions that they should do to start assessing the risks around AI. I think that's kind of a starting point. I think that's going to be driving a lot of legislative action over the next year or so. I think in addition to that executive order, I think it's Senate House Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, I think, came up with his framework or foundation around the productions of AI as well. I'm trying to remember what that was called. It was called SAFE. Trying to remember off the top of my head what that was. Yeah, it's called the Safe Innovation Framework. So that's something, again, I think he's trying to put some guidelines and some guardrails in place, and I think that it expands and extends on Biden's executive order. And again, we're primarily in the U.S., so I'm kind of talking about more from a U.S. perspective. He's also done a novel approach where, in addition to kind of coming out with his guidelines, he's kicked off what they call the AI Insight Forums, where he's brought in leaders of industry and technical leaders and so on to understand how they should go about actually legislating AI, because they want to get the proper balance between protecting people but also not stifling innovation. So I think those are a couple of things that you may want to watch. And then from a frameworks perspective, I think that it's called out quite a bit in the executive order. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has something called the AI Risk Management Framework. That is something that provides more prescriptive guidance around things you might want to ask to third parties. So that's certainly something that we look at in North America. The executive order has asked NIST to extend that to include things around generative AI. So they're again, these things are in constant flux, but I would say that's another great way to understand at a more tactical level, how you can be assessing your third parties for risk. But again, I think you're going to see AI legislation across the globe, and if you're an organization that needs to adhere to different legislation, you're going to have to do that at a local, a state, a national, and an international level. And so I think you just got to keep on, kind of watching these mandates, and just, if you get in front of this and do it the right way, if you're doing it and ensuring that you have good governance in place and that it's an ethical AI approach that you're taking across the board, as opposed to trying to just, check the box on specific regulations, then I think you'll be on better footing to be able to adapt to the future revisions of legislation in various levels of government.
Right, fantastic. So, if we summarize this interview for someone who is listening to and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
I think, look, AI, I think it could be a daunting thing for a lot of people. Like, it's a black box. I think just recognize that it's another dimension of risk that organizations need to consider with respect to their business partners, just like privacy. And it's very linked to privacy, but just like privacy, there's additional elements that you got to think about in addition to security and privacy controls around ethical use and non-bias, kind of making sure those algorithms are clean and safe. I think that if you don't have one, you should look at establishing a third-party risk management program. If you have one, then you want to extend that program to take in the consideration for third-party AI-related risks. And when you're kind of devising that strategy, or you refine your existing third-party risk management strategy, think about the inventory of third parties that you have today that you're assessing risk on, and think about how that might change if your business partners start to embrace AI. As I mentioned, there may be decisions that you're making today with your internal team that you might be pushing out technology providers in finance or HR or other areas, right, that you need to now consider with a part of your third-party risk management program. And then, you have to, I think, create an effective assessment monitoring program to assess those third parties for risk. And one of those dimensions of risk will be AI. And to give you a better guidance on how you should be assessing that third-party risk, how they're securing, how they're using, these systems, how they're protecting these systems from bias. There are some great standard industry frameworks out there, like NIST, that you can be leveraging. You may need to refine the frameworks and some of the questions specific to your business needs, but they're an awfully good place to start if you're looking at trying to get a handle on generally on the risk that these relationships are bringing to the organization. So I think those would be some of the main areas or takeaways that I would suggest. It's just another risk that needs to be managed. It's complex. Have a third-party risk management program that's comprehensive. Make sure you inventory your third parties to understand which ones could be bringing these risks to the table, and then create an effective assessment and monitoring program to mitigate the risks where possible. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There's lots of people out there that have a lot of knowledge in this space.
All right, fantastic. So we have all the framework for people wanting to go deeper in the AI for risk management. So, Brad, fantastic. That's all my questions. Perhaps you would like to add something that if I forgot something, you would like to add anything, please go ahead.
No, well, thanks a lot for the time. I know we kind of did a high-level banter. Of course, we go a lot deeper in certain areas. We have a lot of resources on our website that you can grab. A lot of it's free. We do third-party risk management study that should be coming out in a webinar next month, and in a write-up after that. So we'll be sure to keep you up to date on some of this information. But I think that's it. And I really appreciate the time, and we're certainly here to promote good hygiene with respect to third parties, and AI is certainly a piece of that. So really, thank you for having us on the show today.
All right. Thank you, Brad, and success with your role and your company, prevalent.net. And I hope we will be cooperating in the future, probably with your additional podcast interview or events like webinars and your blog posts.
Yeah.
Thank
That'd be
you.
awesome. Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thank you.